Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for Thinking Traps. My name is Chris Walchuk. I'll be taking you through the session today. Before we get started, did want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who've been on our sessions before, you know that we'd love to hear from you throughout the session. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or most certainly when I throw some questions out at you, please feel free to communicate with me via the chat box. If you move your cursor around your screen, you should see a number of little circles open up on the bottom. There's a circle with a bubble in it. If you click on that, that is your chat box. It'll open up on the right side of your screen if you click on it. And then there is a to menu, a drop-down menu. And you could either decide if you'd like all of your comments going to everybody, so everybody could see it in the chat box, or if you want to send it privately to me, in which case make sure that it's set to host and presenter or all panelists. Also, we are recording the session, so we'll have that available for you in the next couple of days. So thinking traps, what are we talking about here? Well, we're going to be talking about our cognitive thinking. We're going to talk about becoming much more aware of our own and other people's negative thinking traps. How often do we go to that negative place first? Something happens and we go to that negative place. And so we want to be able to recognize when we do that, because it clearly doesn't get us to the results that we want. We're going to reverse that, and we're going to share with you some techniques, some ideas on how we can do that. So I wanted to jump right in with a little exercise. I'm not sure where you guys are all located, but I am in New Jersey, and it is a beautiful, beautiful day. And I personally love this time of year because I am a morning person. I am a very early riser, and it's so nice for me when the sun is up when I get up. Let's say this morning you woke up, but not because your alarm clock woke you up, but because there was sunshine streaming into your room quite a bit earlier than your alarm clock was set to go off. What did you say to yourself? Tell me in the chat. What's the first thing that came to your mind as you opened your eyes and you saw the sun beaming into your room? Okay, somebody said it's time to get up. Somebody else said happiness. Yay, sunshine. We got a lot of optimists here. That's great. Did nobody say to themselves, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's so early. I can't believe I'm up already. There's probably going to be traffic because there's going to be sun glare. There's an awful lot of people who would wake up to a sunny day like that and think those negative thoughts. The sunny day, the sunshine streaming through your window is a fact. That's just something that's happening. But how we interpret that fact is entirely up to us. And really, when you think about it, every single day, many, many, many times a day, events happen to us, and we react to them in some way. And sometimes it's in a positive way, in an excited way, like some of you had answered, happiness, sunshine, and sometimes in more of those negative ways. And so with those negative ways, what happens is we get caught in what we call thinking traps. And thinking traps are basically types or patterns of thoughts that tend to trap us in anxiety. That's the first place we go. We go to that negative place of something happening. First and foremost, we want to recognize those. It's similar to the self-talk that we give ourselves. How many of you talk to yourselves? If you do, give me a yes in the chat box. Okay, good. I've got an honest crowd here. I see a number of yeses come in. Good. All right. You know what? Pretty much we all do. Some people do it more loudly, out loud, but most people are doing it quietly in their heads. When something good happens, chances are you're saying to yourself, "Oh, that's so great. I'm so happy about that. That's excellent." And when something bad happens, I hear myself saying, "Oh, this is horrible. This is terrible. Why me? Why is this happening again?" And so the trick is to start paying attention to your self-talk. Do you tend to go more in that positive direction? Do you tend to go more in that negative direction? Some people, even if it's bad news, it's hard, they still give themselves those positive coaching kind of messages. Other people, and we all know some people like this, even when something good happens, they'll find something wrong with it. One of my all-time favorite characters was on SNL, Debbie Downer. Y'all remember Debbie Downer? No matter what was going on, people were having a wonderful time. They're talking about great things, and she would always come up with something random and completely negative. And so that's what we do sometimes, is we get caught up in these negative thoughts. What do they look like? Well, one way is jumping to conclusions. Have you ever done that? Something happens, and without having all the facts, you just assume something and you jump to conclusions. How about just going to the worst case scenario? We don't even think about the possibilities, what good might come of something. We just automatically go to, this can't work, this is bad, that's wrong. We've all sat in meetings with people like that. An idea is thrown out, and the first thing out of their mouth is naysaying. Can't do that. That's not going to work. When we make assumptions without any kind of evidence to even back up the assumptions, but in many cases, they're those negative assumptions. And sometimes confusing our thoughts with our actions. So the bottom line is, thinking traps absolutely limit our potential. They stop us from moving forward because we get some sort of a negative interpretation to something that's going on. Sometimes they can get in our way of even having a sense of mission. And so the way around that is to make sure that we do have a mission, that we do set goals, because it's easy for our thoughts to take us in a whole different direction. It can interfere with our job satisfaction. You're at work more than you are anywhere else, at least waking hours. And job satisfaction is probably critical to have the drive to get up every morning, to go to work. But then again, our thoughts sometimes get in our way of reaching that job satisfaction. Rather than focusing on everything that's right in the job, we focus on what's wrong. Has anybody had something go wrong today at work? Or let's even broaden it. Since you got up this morning, did anything go wrong for you? And if so, tell us what it was in the chat. Could be big, could be small, anything that went wrong. No, I'm seeing a bunch of no's come in. Excellent. Well, that's good. But sometimes what happens is when we have a thing go wrong for us, that's what we focus our attention on. We give it all of our attention, rather than the 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 things that have gone right. So they can affect us on so many levels. Ourselves, our family, our community, the greater good. And what happens is often we're not really disturbed by the event. The event is just an event. But it's how we interpret that event, how we view that event, that varies person to person and can leave you with those negative thoughts. Let's do a little exercise. Let's say that you are about to cross the street. You're standing on the edge of the sidewalk, ready to cross the street. And on the other side, there's a big dog ready to come at you. What are you thinking? Tell me in the chat. Okay, somebody said, I love dogs. Okay. Somebody else said, look at that big, beautiful boy. Somebody else said, run and hide. Yeah. Somebody else said, wait and see what the dog does. All right, so we had the two ends of the spectrum, right? Look at that big, beautiful boy. The other one was run and hide. And then somebody somewhere in the middle saying, wait and see what the dog does. And that's exactly what we do with everything. Situations happen, and we can either look at it from the perspective of, wow, what a beautiful dog. I love dogs. Or I'm terrified of dogs. I got bit by a dog once. So when I see a big dog, I'm scared. To, well, let me be cautious, but I'm not going to make any judgment yet. I'm not going to make any decision yet. So if you stick to the positive or you stick to that neutral, you're going to go in one direction. But if you stick to the negative, it might take you in a whole different direction. Now, sometimes that could be to your benefit, right? If I was once bit by that exact kind of dog, maybe it is better that I run and hide and go the other way because the chances that could happen again are there. But on the other hand, I can't make that assumption that every dog I ever see is going to do what that other dog did. So this idea of thinking traps is not new. It goes back to 55 BC. Epictetus, the first philosopher, who said that we can control our thoughts. And the theory of reality and human nature basically says that, again, we have the opportunity to distinguish and determine a situation. But that's good and bad, because that can definitely take us to the wrong place. We can't always control every event that happens to us, but we absolutely can control our response to that event. And so the idea of taking control of what we can control is most important. Because if we decide, I have no control over this, there is nothing that I can do about this situation, what we've basically done is shut the door and said, that's it. It is what it is. That's it. But if we kind of brainstorm a little bit, step back, and think, what can I do? We gain back that power. Let's do another example. Instead of getting up really early because that sun was streaming into your bedroom, you got up late this morning, which is too bad because you have a meeting first thing in the morning. So you are scrambling now to get yourself dressed and get yourself out the door. As you get in your car, you're thinking to yourself, if everything goes perfectly, I might be able to make this meeting. You get in the car, you start driving, so far so good, and then all of a sudden on the highway, there is dead stop traffic. What do? Tell me in the chat. Are you reacting? Are you doing anything? Somebody said yelling. Okay. Somebody said text my boss and give her the 411 and hope that it's not an accident ahead. Somebody else said wait to see how bad it is, but start thinking of alternatives. Excellent. This really is a very positive group. I usually have a lot more comments saying, I'm cursing, I'm banging on the steering wheel, right? Because that's a typical reaction that we sometimes have when something like that happens. I need to get to work. I need to get to this meeting, and I'm in this dead stop traffic. And so those emotions oftentimes take over, and that doesn't usually lead us to good decisions. Somebody said, lots of years of learning that anger gets me nowhere. Excellent, okay? And that's the same person who said, wait to see how bad it is and then start thinking of alternatives. Well, that's excellent. And that's the whole point of this, is that we don't want to let ourselves fall into those thinking traps, right? The negative thinking trap in that situation is, this is horrible, this is terrible, I'm going to be late for my meeting, or I'm not going to make my meeting, I'm going to get in trouble, my boss is going to be angry with me, and we start coming up with all these scenarios of how bad something is going to be. But what several of you said is exactly the direction we want to take it. To say, you know what, let me wait and see. I'm not going to get myself upset about this. Let me see what's going on, but I am going to start thinking about alternatives. What are some of the alternatives? So I know one of you said text my boss, give her the 411. What else? What else could you do in that situation that's going to be more helpful than cursing, yelling, banging on the steering wheel? Good. Somebody said find an alternate route, contact the boss, call into the meeting. Yeah, if I'm really, really stuck, if this is something that's really going to make me late, maybe I could even call into the meeting from the car. We've got the technology to do that now. But at the very least, I'm calling my boss or somebody in the office, whoever's running the meeting, to say, hey, look, I'm sitting in this traffic. There's nothing I can do. Listen to the traffic report, someone said. Yep. So put on the radio, look at an app if you have one. You're not moving anyway, so you can look at your phone and see if there's, on your app it tells you that, this traffic is a 10-mile backup. And then as a result of whatever you find out, you decide what happens next. If it's a 10-mile backup and the road is closed, that's what you heard on the radio, well, then I'm not making it to the meeting, so calling into the meeting is probably the right thing. If I'm still inching, but it's slow, maybe I can think of, as one of you said, the alternate route. Get off the next exit as soon as I can and do some back roads. But the point is, we have control over our thoughts. Let's take control before our thoughts take control and take us in directions that we don't want them to. So let me share with you a number of things that people do, some typical thinking traps, and then at the end of this, I want you to let me know, are any of these ones that you have fallen into or occasionally fall into? So the first one, catastrophizing, is the most common and the most dangerous. And basically what happens there is we exaggerate the situation and make it something much worse than it is, making a mountain out of that molehill. We use words like, this is horrible, this is terrible, this is the worst thing that can happen, I can't believe this is happening to me. And when we do that, it actually causes our brain to work against us. We almost paralyze ourselves into believing that there's no solution to that problem. Sometimes it's a yes-no question, but the answer is usually gray. So it could be very black and white, but we kind of convolute it a little bit. We make it go in different directions, and it doesn't give us an absolute answer. Sometimes we discount or discredit things. We minimize the value. Don't notice the positives. And that happens especially sometimes people with themselves. They minimize things, especially people who are perfectionists tend to do this. They get a good feedback from a boss on something that they did, and instead of just saying thank you, they say, if I only had time, I would have done this, I could have done that, I should have done this. Right? They discount or discredit, even though something is being praised or somebody's pleased about it. Using words like always, should, never, and must. Why do you think those are a problem? Why should we try to stay away from those words? Tell me in the chat. Okay, somebody said they are roadblocks. Somebody else said they are shoulds. So when we say the always, the shoulds, the never, it's the expectation that something is going to be that way. They're so definitive that once again, we limit ourselves. Unconscious personalizing. That's when we kind of blame ourselves for everything, right? It's all about me. This went wrong because of me. I couldn't, again, it goes back to those could have, should haves. Or externalizing, which is the opposite. It's always everybody else's fault. It's never mine. And of course, lastly, denial. Can't accept an event as it is. And that doesn't let us move forward. So have you ever found yourself in any of these? And if so, tell us which one or ones. Okay, somebody said the unconscious personalizing. Okay, yeah. I think a lot of people tend to do that one. Blame yourself for everything when it really isn't necessarily your fault. Any others? Well, I'm not surprised nobody's answering that one because based on some of your answers, you tend not to do that. So that's really, really good. Oh, somebody said pretty much all of them. Well, you know what? I think that we all have that potential to do all of these things. Some of us do it more often than others. And so, as we said, recognizing them really is the first step. Recognizing that when we think this way, when we catastrophize, when we make it black and white when it's not, when we use the always and shoulds and nevers and musts, we're putting some kind of a definitive look at something when in fact it could be much more open and there could be a lot more options for us. So some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves when an event occurs and I'm somehow reacting to it, the first question I should ask myself is, am I being realistic? Am I exaggerating this or am I being realistic? Do you ever hear somebody, so sitting in that traffic jam, somebody would say, I'm never going to get to work. This is going to take all day. Is it really going to take all day? Honestly? Are they never going to get to work? And people don't think that by saying something like that, it affects their behaviors. But it does. Because the things that we think definitely get interpreted into our attitudes and into our behaviors. So doing that sort of a reality check, stepping back and saying, am I being realistic here, is a great way to start. How else can I view this situation? How would somebody else view this situation? That's always a great way to approach something. Is there a different viewpoint? Is this a fact that I'm talking about, or is it just my opinion? Am I making any assumptions here? And that's why I'm having the reaction that I am. What is the worst thing that could happen, honestly? And is this it? Am I letting my past color my thinking? Do you think that we do that? Do our past experiences kind of shape how we look at things in the future? Give me a yes or no in the chat. What do you think? Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of yeses coming in. And yeah, definitely. And so sometimes that's a good thing because we had some learnings from a past experience. But sometimes it's a bad thing because we make those assumptions. Just because it went bad 2 years ago doesn't mean it's going to go bad now. You've all probably been in situations where you're in a meeting with somebody. I kind of referenced this before. And maybe you're brainstorming and somebody comes up with an idea. And there's always at least one person who does the naysay. Oh, we tried that. Yeah, that's not going to work. Yeah, that won't work. We can't do that. And what they're doing is maybe we did try that or something similar to that a year ago or two. But are the circumstances exactly the same? Or could they be different now? Is the proposal, the idea, exactly the same as it was then? Or has it been updated and maybe those changes actually make it more reasonable? So our past is our past, and it can be beneficial to us if we're learning from those experiences, but it could also be negative if we allow ourselves to fall into those patterns. Have I either told or asked too many people or the wrong people? So it's always a good idea to have other people as a sounding board, somebody who's a trusted person that you can talk to and say, so what do you really think of this? Give me your honest opinion about this. But sometimes when we ask too many people their opinions, what's going to happen? Yeah, somebody said we have too many opinions. That's exactly right, which confuses it even more. Or if we ask the wrong people who have maybe a negative viewpoint of something, well, then obviously, overwhelmingly, we're going to have that negative viewpoint. Is it worth worrying about? Is it even going to matter tomorrow, next week, next month? That's a great question to ask ourselves. And what happens if I do nothing in response to something? Is there a consequence? Is it bad? Or can it be okay? So really thinking about our thoughts helps us to recognize that sometimes we truly are our own worst enemies. And by letting ourselves go in directions that aren't helpful, what we're doing is we're confusing things, we're complicating things when we don't need to. Let's do a couple of more examples. I want to give you some scenarios, and I want to see what your thoughts are on this. All right, so the first one is about delegation. So let's say it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Your boss walks over to your desk and says, I need you to finish this report before you leave today. And he or she proceeds to hand you lots of papers and charts and spreadsheets and gives you just a very, very brief description of what needs to be done. Your plan was to leave at 5 because you have an evening commitment. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when the boss hands you that pile of stuff and says, I need it by the end of the day. Tell me in the chat. Somebody said, good grief. Yeah, right? What else? Any other reactions to that? Okay, somebody else said surprised because my boss would never do that. Well, and that's an interesting one. So the good news is, in your experience so far, your boss has never done something like that. So the expectation is that they never would. So naturally, if they did something like that, you would be surprised. Kind of like, wow, that's not like them. Okay, the person who said good grief then said, then I will ask what they really need by 5 o'clock. Okay, so that's step 2. So first we want to go by our feeling, right? And in many cases what happens is the feeling, if this happened, is I can't believe this is happening. I've got places to be. So maybe we get anxious. We get nervous that we can't get this thing done. We're worried about that. And so we might react in a negative way and either say something to the boss like, there's no way that can be done. I have to leave at 5 o'clock. But that probably wouldn't be a good reaction, right? So we need to step back a little bit and really think about this. All right. And like one of you said, then ask the question, well, how much of this do you really need by 5 o'clock? What exactly do you mean you need this by the end of the day? Is it really by the end of the day, or do you need it for tomorrow? Because that makes a really big difference too, right? Let's say I can't stay today. I've got a commitment at 5 o'clock this evening. I have to leave. but I can come in early tomorrow. If the boss wasn't going to do anything with it until tomorrow anyway, like sending it to somebody else, well, maybe I can just come in early tomorrow and do it. So the thinking, we don't want to fall into the traps. We want to keep that thinking wide open of what are the possibilities? What are some ways that I can handle this particular situation so that it doesn't send me into behaviors that I might react negatively? Here's another one, and this is about giving an employee feedback. So you know it's annual review season, but so far your boss hasn't said anything. Then on his or her way out the door this evening, he or she says, oh, by the way, we're going to be doing your review first thing tomorrow morning. And they leave. How are you feeling right now? What are you feeling? Give me some thoughts in the chat. Okay, somebody said nervous. Somebody said glad they mentioned it. Okay, yeah, right? Because they could have just not said anything until the morning and just said, come on in my office, let's do your review, right? Somebody said, no worries, I know I work to their expectations. Excellent. So you're not letting anything get in your way. You know how you're doing, and that's fine. You knew it was coming anyway, right? You weren't surprised or shocked by it. Somebody else said, excited because I love reviews, but also a little nervous. Okay, excellent. Somebody else, and again, this is such a positive group. Everybody's got pretty positive responses here. Somebody else could have said, oh my goodness, I'm not ready for this. I'm not prepared for this, even though they knew it was that season, but they maybe thought that they would get a little bit more notice. And so they're going to go home and they're going to be worried about it. They're going to be thinking about, oh my gosh, what's my boss going to say? Is it what I think he or she is going to say? And sometimes we can work ourselves into a frenzy based on that distorted thinking that we have. So let's talk about ways that we can manage that. One, be as preventative as you possibly can. So anticipate situations, what can happen. Like in that second example, you knew it's that season, right? You're pretty much waiting for the boss to say it's time to do your review. So I could have been really, really proactive. I could have been thinking about it already, maybe had some notes ready, so that literally when the boss said, we're going to do your review, even if they had shown up at my desk and said, let's do it now, I'd be ready for it. Be able to identify if there's any negative or distorted thinking that's happening. And if somebody else is doing it, help them to become more aware of it. Because the less distorted thinking we have, the better off we're going to be. Let's go back to those examples. So do you think it was a good idea that the boss on his way or his or her way out made the comment about, we're doing your review first thing in the morning? Could they have done something a little bit differently that maybe would have avoided somebody potentially falling into a thinking trap? And if so, what could they have done? Okay, somebody said mentioned it earlier. Yeah, exactly, right? If they had mentioned it first thing in the morning and said, oh, by the way, tomorrow we're going to be doing your review. Okay, so now I have time to really be thinking about this, as opposed to as they're walking out the door and I have no time to even discuss anything with them. Somebody else said scheduled it ahead of time. Yeah, how about even giving more notice, not just tomorrow. Let's set up the appointment, what works for you, and scheduled it with that employee. Somebody else said empathize with the late notice and pose it as, does this work for you? Okay, yeah, so that's another way, is turning that around. Does it work for you? So there's a lot of different ways that we can respond to any situation that we have, but oftentimes people don't. And sometimes it's a lack of emotional intelligence. Anybody familiar with this topic of emotional intelligence? Okay, good. I'm seeing a few people saying yes. Yeah, so emotional intelligence really is all about being very attuned to our emotions. Over the course of the day, you have many, 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 many emotions. Literally, you can be feeling up and down all day long. Something good happens, you're feeling happier. Something bad happens, you're angry. Something good happens, you're feeling better. Something bad happens, you're feeling nervous or anxious. And this can be going on all day long. But when somebody is emotionally intelligent, what they do is they start becoming aware of those emotions when their emotions are going up and going down and changing. Why is that important? Those of you who said that you're familiar with emotional intelligence, or anybody, why is it important for me to be aware of my emotions? Yeah. Somebody said, so you don't overreact. Exactly. Because from an emotional standpoint, oftentimes we react to situations, and the idea is we want to be able to respond to situations, not react. Somebody else said, so you can control them and not the other way around. Yeah, exactly. People who are emotionally not emotionally intelligent just have no clue. And whatever happens, they just react to that situation. Have you ever known a person like that? Maybe you had a boss that if anything that went wrong, oh my gosh, they're just yelling at somebody, down somebody's throat, blaming people. Somebody said that used to be me. See, and I love when people have like over time these learnings and recognize that I did those kinds of things, but it took me a while to start recognizing that that doesn't work for me. And so the recognition of it is really that first step. Emotionally intelligent people are so attuned to those emotions because they know that oftentimes they have certain reactions or responses that are going to go out to the outside. Now, it's one thing you feeling a particular way, but it's another thing what you put out there to your coworkers, to your boss, to your subordinates, to your family, to your friends, right? But unfortunately, whatever we're thinking, what's in our heads, directly affects our attitudes, whether we're in a good mood, bad mood, happy, sad, angry, and in many cases affects those behaviors. And so that's why emotionally intelligent people know that I need to be very aware of this and be able to control those. So think about situations think about the last time you didn't sleep well. What was going on? How come you didn't sleep well? Were you thinking about anything? Were you worried about something? Okay, somebody said tension. Yep, stress. Yeah, that's one of the main reasons where people are losing sleep, right? Because they're anxious or they're worried about something. So if you can remember, maybe this was last night, maybe it was weeks ago, what was it that you were stressed about or you had this tension about? Hindsight is always 20/20. So looking back at it now, whether it was last night or 3 weeks ago, think about what the event was that was keeping you up. Maybe you had a deadline to meet and you really didn't think you were going to meet that deadline, right? You had a lot of work still to do and the thing was due tomorrow. Was it the deadline you were actually worried about, or the fact that you kept saying to yourself, there's no way we're going to get this done. There's no way we're going to be able to deliver this to the client. It's not going to happen. Or a combination of both of those things. The deadline in and of itself can be stressful enough. But adding on top of that, my negative thinking trap of reminding myself how this is never going to happen, there's no way we're going to be able to do this, now it's added a whole nother layer, which can, in many cases, really stop people from doing the things that they need, literally paralyzing people from making the decisions that they need and moving forward. How about the last time you maybe didn't eat as well as you should? We know we should eat well, right? But we have choices all the time. Instead of getting a salad, I go for the burger. Why did I do that? Intellectually, I know that salad is far better for me. I know I should be having that salad and not that big juicy burger. But why did I do that? Well, maybe I had a bad day. Maybe I had a bad morning and I said, you know what? I just want to treat myself. I don't care. Right? So again, this is us talking to ourselves and giving ourselves certain messages. And so again, if we're aware of them and we can do that reality check, recognize, does it make sense for me to think this way, or is this just getting in my way? And be patient with yourself. Recognize that these thinking traps are often ones that we have been trapped in for a really long time. And so it's not something that you're going to change immediately, but the recognition in most cases is that first step that we start recognizing it. So as I mentioned before, I want you in the next couple of weeks, I want you to think about your self-talk. Listen to your self-talk. And if you find that it's overly negative, stop yourself, question it, and see if you could turn it into something more positive. I was trying to do this morning because, I fall into these all the time, but I always try to recognize. So I was in a really big hurry this morning. I had to be at a client's early this morning, and then I needed to get back here in time for this webinar. And so a lot going on in my house this morning, people moving around, trying to get places, and so I was a little bit anxious. And you know what happens when you're in a hurry and you're anxious. You drop things, you spill things, right? So I was trying to put some water into my daughter's water bottle for school, and I didn't hold it right, and I spilled a bunch of water on the floor. And my first instinct was, oh, really? Do I need this today? Like I have time to clean the floor now. And then I literally stopped myself, and I said, you know what? The floor is actually a little dirty. I haven't cleaned it in a little while. So you know what? Let me just take a little bit and clean this floor up. And it literally took me a minute to do it. I wiped up the floor. There was some yuck on the paper towel, which meant that the floor could use some cleaning. And it turned into a positive. But my first instinct was, really, do I need this today? So always give yourself that opportunity for that second thought if the first one is a negative one. Because oftentimes that's when the more rational part of our brain kicks in a little bit and we respond to a situation rather than react to it. It's sort of like if you're driving and somebody cuts you off on the highway. For many people, our first instinct is to hit the horn, to yell at them, to curse at them, maybe some choice hand gestures, to cut them off, right? We see it all the time, and we've probably done it ourselves. That's a reaction. That is strictly an emotional reaction to the fact that this person became a threat to you. They cut you off. They made you feel like you were in danger. But do you do that all the time when somebody cuts you off? Probably not. Sometimes you probably just think, whatever. Maybe they're in a hurry. Maybe they need to be somewhere sooner. I'm not going to do anything. What if I do? What if they hit my car? It's not worth it. Right? That was a response to a situation, the same situation. But I stepped back a little bit and I was able to reason through the initial emotion and get to a much better response to that. If versus when. So lots of times we hear ourselves say, if this happens, I'll do this. And if we really want to be mentally proactive, what we can say is, when this happens, this is what I'll do. One might think, well, why would I do that? Because then that's kind of making the assumption it's definitely going to happen. And so am I not being on the defensive there? But it's actually being proactive. Because if I think in terms of if this happens, my mind is very much on the if. Where when I say when this happens, here's what I'm going to do. I move away from the theoretical into problem solving. When the guy cuts me off, I'm going to slam on my brakes. When the guy cuts me off, I'm going to make sure it's safe to get into the other lane. And I'm being proactive in terms of thinking about the next thing to do. When we're thinking, when we're problem solving, we're much better off than when we're simply reacting to a situation. Authenticity is also good. Opening yourself up to the idea when these things can happen. What's my typical reaction to that? And just getting to know ourselves a little bit more and being more authentic and honest with ourselves about those. We need to have really, really good communication. So this is now we're involving other people. I know lots of this we're talking about ourselves and what's going on in our own heads. But in those examples that I gave you where the boss came and said, here, I need this done by 3 o'clock, or the other boss said, we're going to do the review, it always involves somebody else. And having great communication is going to eliminate the opportunity for people to fall into thinking traps. Sometimes when we communicate, we confuse things. We talk in circles. We dance around things rather than just being direct, being straight, being assertive, to the point. And the more that we can be clear like that, people won't misunderstand. People won't have time to be able to fall into one of those traps. Having spirited conversation, which basically means it's okay if we disagree with each other, as long as we do it with that mutual respect and understanding. But it's okay because that's going to make us, again, think of better options and other ways of doing things. Having systemic communication ensures that we have that give and take, that it's that constant dialogue, not a monologue. And of course, considerate, thoughtful, respectful kind of communication. Simply by using the basic communication skills, asking lots of questions, clarifying, restating, checking for understanding, summarizing. All of these things can sharpen our communication so that we leave no room for that ambiguity. We leave no room for that misunderstanding or, again, for that ability for somebody to just fall into one of those thinking traps. But oftentimes what we find from a communication standpoint is we're in such a hurry to communicate. We're in such a hurry to do everything that maybe we cut the communication short. Maybe we don't explain something as well as we should. And that, again, leaves that opportunity for people to interpret things the way they want to. So instead, let's take a little more time. Make sure that what I just said to you, you understood. That what you just said to me, I understood and got it exactly how it was intended, rather than being able to fall into those potential assumptions. For just a minute, I want to talk about change, because change is one of those times when people often fall into thinking traps. How many of you like change? When organizational change is happening, when changes in your life are happening, you like them, you embrace them, you look forward to them. If anybody does, give me a yes. Okay, I got a sometimes. All right. No yeses, though. Somebody said not always. Okay. How many of you really don't like change? Like on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I hate change. 10 is I love change. What kinds of numbers would you give yourselves? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of middle of the roads, 5s and 6s. Okay. And so think about the fact that change happens all the time. Organizations go through change, relationships go through change. You're driving to work and there's a detour, you have to change, right? You have to adapt to that, you have to change. So change is inevitable. But change is one of those situations that lots of times we are somewhat uncomfortable with. And when we're uncomfortable with something, that leaves an awful lot of room for these thinking traps to happen. And they happen because oftentimes we fear the unknown. Let's say we have an organizational change that's going on. We're going to start using a new process to do something, new procedures. I know how we do it now. I'm comfortable with it. But now we're being asked to do it a different way. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that. I mean, maybe it'll be okay, but I don't know. I just don't know. So it's that fear of the unknown. And when we don't know, it's easy to fall into the, I'm not sure I can do this. I don't know if I can learn that. And that's based on that fear of failure. And so again, anytime change is going on, we want to know as much about the change as we possibly can. If I'm on the receiving end of this change, my boss comes and tells me we're going to do something different, I want to ask lots and lots and lots of questions so that I fully understand the change, so I don't start making things up and worrying myself over things that I don't need to. If I'm the person who is creating the change or announcing the change, maybe you're the manager of a department and you're the one who's announcing the change, make sure that you're providing as much information, as much detail, answer as many questions as you possibly can. So again, we leave no room for people to be able to go inside their heads and start questioning these things. So that communication, as we talked about a moment ago, is so critically important during those times of change. Oftentimes during change also, we say to ourselves things like, I can't do that. I can't learn that new computer language. I can't. And so we have to dispute that thinking trap. Saying something like, I can't do something, is falling into a thinking trap. How do I dispute that? Maybe I could remind myself how we had a recent change and I didn't think I could do that, and now I'm doing it. And now I'm doing it even better than I did the other thing. Right? We have lots of life experiences that we can go back to and that can help us to recognize that we are capable and we don't need to fall into those thinking traps based on those assumptions. All right, I have another example for you, and I want to, again, let's work through this one. So an employee gives a presentation that is very engaging and informative. The employee comes to you after and says, I did such a poor job. That was horrible. Everybody looked bored and disinterested. Okay, stop there. What would you say to help this person? How would you try them? They're obviously falling into one of those thinking traps, right? They believe that everybody looked bored, that everybody looked disinterested, that it was horrible. So how are you going to help them work through that? This is a coworker of yours or somebody that reports into you. Okay, somebody said, why do you say that? Good. Somebody else said, what specifically did you do poorly on? Yeah, right? Because they're just making this generalization. I did such a poor job. It was horrible. But if you start asking them, drill down a little bit, well, what do you think you did poorly on? What's going on? What are you thinking? All of a sudden, it's going to force them into thinking about the reality of the situation rather than the assumption that it's based on. And in this situation, you already heard compliments. You know that people were engaged with all of that. And so the idea is we want to be able to help each other pull ourselves out of those traps. So I want you to think about, we don't do this in our webinars, we do this in our in-class ones, but I want you as homework to think about a situation that maybe you have going on right now, where either you have fallen into a thinking trap or maybe somebody around you has. So either you can pull yourself out of that thinking trap by doing the reality check, disputing it, changing the verbiage on it, or If you know that somebody around you is doing that or about something, how are you going to help them recognize that they've fallen into one of these thinking traps and help them out? And I want you to do that sometime in the next couple of days. Okay, don't put this off. Really think about that. Because the more we start thinking about how we fall into these traps, the sooner we're going to start pulling ourselves out of them. And the idea is solutions do come out of those thinking traps, but lots of times we need to, broaden the way we look at things. And so with that homework assignment, that's going to help you to set those kinds of goals and figure that out. All right, so the last thing, some best practices just to close off. And if anybody's got any questions or comments, we've got about 4 minutes left. Please put them in the chat while I'm doing this last slide so that we can definitely refer to those. All right, so our best practices. Oh, no, I'm sorry, going the wrong way. Here we go. When you hear yourself saying something, falling into the trap, literally stop, breathe, listen to that inner voice, and be prepared to change it if it takes you into that negative place. Reframe it. Start saying things like, I think I can. I know it's going to be okay. I have to keep on going. I can do this. I'll do my best. Rather than those opposite things that we tend to say, I can't do this. I don't know what's going to happen. This is bad. Right? Because if we stay in those negatives, we literally shut things off. And I love Henry Ford's quote, if you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Think about that. If you think you can do something, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen, but the chances are pretty good because you think you can, so you're going to probably work towards it, put some effort towards it. But if you think you can't do something, I can't get that promotion, I can't lose 20 pounds, then guess what? You can't, because you've basically closed that door. You've decided that you can't do it. So those thinking traps can really hold us back from accomplishing a lot of things. Recognizing them, working through them, and helping others working through them can really make a difference in terms of our own success, our own moving forward, but also the success of our colleagues, our teams, and our organization as a whole. Again, if anybody's got any questions or comments, please put them into the chat right now. And I just want to spend a minute here. Again, if you've been on some of our sessions before, we've probably given you the commercial on your EAP. So Anthem EAP is there to provide you with information, resources, assistance, support, coaching, counseling on literally anything. Could be work-related, could be anything that you're dealing with at home. Maybe you need some counseling because of an issue that's happening. Maybe you've run into some legal or financial issues or you have questions. Maybe you have elder care concerns, child care concerns, parenting concerns. There's a component that's got identity theft recovery, free credit monitoring. There's lots and lots of great information, articles, webinars on demand, all kinds of things on the website that can be really helpful to you relating to this topic and so many others. You can log on to the website by going to anthemeap.com. Your login is Plow and Hearth. And then if you would like, you can also call the 800 number and talk to somebody. If you have a particular need, maybe you need to find a child care center for a child, a nursing home for an elderly parent. Maybe you need an attorney because you have a specific question. Anything like that, those are things that you can contact them. It is free to you. Your organization has chosen to have this benefit available to you. It is available 24/7, 365 days a year. It's available to you and your family members in your household, and it's confidential. So all good things that can provide you with lots of resources and information you might need. All right, I'm looking at the chat and I'm not seeing any other questions. So if not, we are right at the top of the hour, so we're going to close off now. But again, we thank you for joining us today. We hope this gave you some food for thought, and we hope you join us for future sessions. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.